Major funding for these broadcasts has been provided by grants from Madison Realty Capital, New York Community Bank, M&T Bank, AmTrust Title, Ariel Property Advisors, Customers Bank, Capital One Bank, Meridian Capital Group. Additional funding has been provided by grants from AVR Realty Company, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, Briarwood Organization, CBRE, Citizens Bank, Colliers International NYC, Collins Building Services, CPEX Real Estate Services, Douglaston Development Levine Builders, Flushing Bank, Friedman LLP, Handler Real Estate Organization Handro Properties, Hodges Ward Elliott INC, Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, John Castamatidis Red Apple Group, Kilroy Architectural Windows, Mattone Group, Mercantile Bank, Newmark Knight Frank, Optimum Window Manufacturing Corp., People's United Bank, Rockefeller Group, Rosewood Realty Group, SJP Properties, Stonehenge NYC, TD Bank, Terra CRG, the Merengoff Family Foundation, the Moynihan Organization, Moynihan Capital Partners, and these friends. In the eloquent words of Mark Twain, as you were saying, Mr. Conlon?
The rumors of my death have been greatly exaggerated. Is that what you're thinking of?
That's exactly what I'm thinking of. And that's the reality of the state of retail. People think the death has taken place, but it's totally exaggerated. And today, I've assembled these individuals to discuss the state of retail. My guests include Joseph Mattone, Chairman, CEO of the Mattone Organization, LLC. Chris Conlon, Executive Vice President and COO of Acadia Realty Trust. Brad Blumenfeld, Principal of Blumenfeld Development Corp. And last but not least, our only operator over here, Avi Canner, co-owner of Morton Williams Supermarkets. So over the years, retail has changed. 3 years ago, there was nothing called Allbirds. We didn't have Warby Parker, we didn't have Barnabas, but we had Old Navy, and we had Sears, and we had Montgomery Ward, and we have other changes. So where do we see the changes? Where's the biggest change taking place?
Well, what I would say first is the retail apocalypse that I think you're referring to was as much about department stores and malls as anything else, but it grabbed headlines. And we are all in that business. We all got swept up with it. And I think it was exaggerated that retail was under an apocalyptic moment. And what we're seeing on the other side of that is that strong retailers are surviving and succeeding, and other retailers that are unable to evolve or heavily burdened by debt or some other circumstances are really struggling. And that widening gap between the haves and have-nots is playing out very quickly right now.
But couldn't we see that in your industry, Avi? I mean, there was once the Great Atlantic and Pacific supermarket chain, the A&P, and then people spoke about Pathmark, and there were other situations. But today, A&P is gone, Food Emporium is gone, many of the other small chains, Bohack, the other ones are Packers, if you would remember. They're all gone. What keeps Morton Williams in business and continues to grow? Because over the last couple of years, you're expanding. You're opening up on 72nd Street and 3rd Avenue. You're opening up on East End Avenue. And you probably opened up 3 new stores in the last couple of years.
Absolutely. The chains you mentioned are systematic of trying to grow, overgrow, go into B locations, and expand too quickly into different areas. We are laser focused primarily on Manhattan. We've been in business for over 50 years. We know the neighborhoods we're in. We're really in tune with our service offerings, market trends, and very importantly, we also understand our finances in terms of the value of long-term leases and maintaining control over payroll and other expenses.
What's your typical lease today that you're signing?
It's a broad range. I would say typical is 10 years. Atypical is beyond that, and we're seeing some structured leases, what I'll call structured leases, where it might be 10 years, but there might be the tenant might get the right to leave earlier if certain volume projections aren't met or other conditions change.
That's an interesting comment. Isn't it into some of the leases, if a large portion of the tenancy moves out or occupancy drops below X?
It's called co-tenancy provisions, and a retailer will come in and say, I'll pay this rent for this amount of time in this lease, so long as your anchor tenant and a certain percentage of the shopping center remains open. If that changes, I have the right to go to alternative rent or eventually terminate my lease. So it's in all of our interest to make sure that we keep our occupancy up and our properties vibrant so that those co-tenancy provisions don't come into effect.
Joe, what are you seeing today? You went to urban neighborhoods, as we were talking before the show, in
Lots
Jamaica.
of urban neighborhoods, and mostly sometimes minority areas, but you would think would be more severely impacted. The vacancy causes, I believe, have been due to general economic malaise in the country. I can't pinpoint a single cause. I think it's a cumulative problem for some of the retailers, the smaller guys being kind of put on an economic cross and therefore having to put the key in the door and disappearing. I think it's been a change of attitude towards survival. Many of the articles I've read in the journals and special newspapers that relate these things seem to say that the problem is that the landlords are asking for too much rents. Now, I don't accept that. And then there's the justification that they say they asked for those rents because they got these big mortgages they have to carry and they were used to the rents they were getting and they need more money. So you got both sides of the scale. But the point of the matter is the store is vacant. And some of the best locations along Madison Avenue are vacant.
Many years ago, I remember I had families who owned property on Madison Avenue. And some of the stores were open on Madison Avenue more as a billboard or prominence as a headquarters as opposed to a main retail. They wanted to be there to show the brand recognition on Madison Avenue.
And that may work for one or two sites or one or two locations in a portfolio, but you can't have a retail portfolio built out of lost leaders, right? So I think, in large part, a lot of the vacancies, what happened was rents were pushing up and people were paying, in a low interest rate environment, people were paying low cap rates for these, high watermark leases. And a lot of things traded in the last couple of years based on rents or potential rents that could be. So now the new person bought a center or a condo and needs to fill it with a high watermark rent, and they can't afford it. If they do, they'll be underwater on their mortgage. So I think it's just a natural cycle in real estate that there are cycles.
What effect on all of you is the Amazon effect having on owners and on tenants?
Yeah, let me take that, Michael. So we know that Amazon bought Whole Foods and reinvigorated Whole Foods and made them a much stronger and tougher competitor. What it's also done, what Amazon has done, and I'm speaking for the retail marketplace in Manhattan where we operate, it's really devastated retail in communities, in neighborhoods, where the retail operators in those neighborhoods, for example, say up 3rd Avenue in the 60s, 70s, 80s, the retailers in those neighborhoods cater to the residents of those neighborhoods. They're not destination stores. It's not like, for example, Soho. If you go to Soho on a weekend, you see all these interesting new retail concepts catering to destination customers. But if you live in a neighborhood in Manhattan, you're doing a lot of your ordering online on Amazon. So I think Amazon has directly resulted in the increase of vacancy rates in neighborhoods throughout the city, as well as a reduction of
But
rents.
part of that is also based on the millennials or generations who don't go to a store anymore. Okay, they live on the internet.
I would say that Amazon's done a good job of accelerating a weeding out process. Those retailers that are well capitalized and have the ability to evolve and face the challenges that Amazon is proposing are succeeding in the face of it. Those that either waited too long or were unable or unwilling to change, their demise has been accelerated. So I think that there is a lot of carnage in the wake of Amazon, but some of it is in the retailer community being unable to adapt to it.
Right.
They're a new competitor. That's nothing new about that.
Right, and we talked about this a number of years ago when I was on the show, that all retailers were going to be forced to up their game in the wake of internet sales.
Look at Best Buy. They've survived. Everybody thought that they were going to go out of business. Okay,
And
Dick's is still surviving. Okay, they're.
And there's a lot that are struggling, quite frankly. Sears, Kmart didn't evolve. Penny's is slow to evolve. Bed Bath & Beyond, love them. They're under siege right now. If you look at their comp store sales over the past 2 years, they're negative 2 to 5%. That's not sustainable. They've got to figure out a way.
So what about the small store concept? Like Target has changed their approach. I mean, when you signed Target originally in Brooklyn, it was 125,000, 150,000 square feet. Now you have the small segments Target opening all over. Do we see other chains doing small sizing, downsizing to that type of location?
They're talking about it. It's hard to do. Well, first of all, right sizing is almost impossible to do. Best Buy tried it, Staples tried it, Kohl's is currently trying it. I'm rooting for all of them. It's very hard and very expensive to right size an existing fleet. What Target's doing is a little bit different. Target has decided to open up flexible format stores in the neighborhood of 15,000 to 50,000 square feet in urban markets closer to the customer, all part of a bigger strategy in the acquisition of Shipt to be able to deliver same day from 1,800 stores around the country. That gives them a real shot at competing with Amazon because they already have the points of distribution. That's extraordinary. And Target's rolling out a $7 billion remodel and revamping of their fleet around this. They're not laying down. Walmart's doing the same thing.
Who else is expanding today? Which other chains in general are expanding?
Brad and I were talking earlier about something that's really energizing to me, and that's these new brands. So what I'll call pure play e-commerce companies that are now deciding or realizing that the cost of customer acquisition online is not sustainable. And in order to meet that, they need to open a physical fleet
But
around that.
50 Warby Parkers?
Or 500. They don't
Right.
They announced today they're doing 100.
Yeah, and Casper's opening 200 bedding stores.
Casper is completely,
So, or Bonobos, or Allbirds, or Reformation, or Outdoor Voices. We've completed 3 deals with them. These are all really exciting young companies that are realizing that a physical fleet combined with really great execution online is the perfect combination of success.
Joe?
It's kind of a tough thing to segregate because it's such a mixed bag. I'm not avoiding answering you. I don't want to mislead with the answer. My interest would be trying to aim for a retailer that requires your presence. That's what I told my kids anyway. I think you hit upon it. When you mentioned about the kind of tenant you would like to have. It's got to be somebody who has to go to the place to get the product or enjoy the facility.
The entire City Point is a destination, okay?
Yes.
Even though downtown Brooklyn has evolved into more of a live-work 24-hour community today. But the movie theater is a destination. People want to go there. When you took one of your shopping centers and made it the 100,000 square foot fitness center,
Right.
so it's an experience also.
Well, there's all sorts of businesses that aren't, purely retail driven, but more experiential. Restaurants, gyms, medical. We talked about it earlier.
Look at the medical and the use, okay? In the Smith Haven Mall was the shopping center. You know, the urgent care centers today, the medical groups, everything is opening up into different neighborhoods. What's happening with the outlet centers in general? What's your thoughts about that?
They seem to be, there was a thought around, and you guys developed one, so you can really speak to this, but my
I
take
know.
on it is that, years ago, they needed to be on the outskirts of a traditional retail hub, meaning, Woodbury, New York, or Riverhead, Long Island, or somewhere in Pennsylvania. They've been moving in, so the barriers or the resistance by the department stores around these brands has been softened a bit. And so they're moving in closer, and indeed Staten Island, right? So, or in your case, Suffolk County out in Comac.
Right.
So I think there's still a place for the outlet center. They're getting in closer to the population centers. That, I think, to me, that puts the ones that are real destinations on the outskirts at risk, because why would I want to go all the way out there if I can go closer? It's playing out. It's an interesting evolution.
What about the restaurants? I mean, I remember you a couple of years ago, leasing some of your small sites to restaurants.
That's right.
Okay.
Well, it's a popular use. Well, most gasoline stations we dealt with were required to have at least between 15 and 20,000 square feet of land. Now, you can put a decent-sized restaurant anywhere from 5,000 to 8,000 feet, and you would have adequate parking. So that's why you could get a restaurateur interested in a location, because they were visible, they were on corners, and
Let's talk
that
about
appealed.
restaurants for you in your portfolio. I mean, you have an Applebee's right next door to East River Plaza. Does rather well. It's a good
Yeah.
location for that.
Yeah, I think whether it's restaurants or retail, generally the whole category is upping their game and needs to be conscious of cost as minimum wages go up. They're putting more and more automation into their fleet and making their brands and their box cooler and nicer. So, for instance, Starbucks, their online app has been a huge success, where people no longer need to wait in line 20 minutes to get a coffee. It's pre-ordered, they're in and out quickly, so it's a much better experience for every
It's
single
like
customer.
Sweetgreens. Sweetgreens, they have a waiting list. People order over there and they wait online to just pick up the items, but it's producing a change.
So have you
Now,
walked by Dig Inn or Cava
What?
at lunchtime?
You can't get in.
Can't get in.
That's happening on retail. A very interesting phenomenon. It happened to me when I tried to get a cup of coffee at Gregory's, and I offered to pay by cash. They said, we don't take coinage anymore. We don't take currency.
Most
We only-
of the vendors in our food hall in Brooklyn do not take cash. It's just a hassle.
You have an ATM?
We have several ATMs. They're pretty profitable, actually. But people are using them for different purposes.
Speaking of that, do you have ATMs in your stores?
We have ATMs in some stores. Each of our checkouts accepts debit cards, and customers can get cash back as well. So it's not ATMs are not as important. 70% of our sales are now on credit cards. In fact, we're also we're installed because of the minimum wage increases that have been really devastating to us for a number of reasons. We're starting to introduce self-checkouts, and the self-checkouts will be credit card only.
I happened to be in Denver this weekend, and we took the grandkids to a Walmart to pick up certain things for a charity event. And I noticed the registers, I'd say in the Walmart, 70% of the restaurant registers were self-checkout, with maybe 30% actual.
Sure. Well, let me tell you a little about the minimum wage increase. In New York City, over a 4-year period, $9 to $11 to $13, it goes this December to $15. So you have 4 years in a row of 420% increases in a row. As a retailer, right? As a retailer, you ask yourself, how can I continue making money if this happens? And it becomes very difficult when you combine the minimum wage increase to the difficulty of doing business in New York City, with all the regulations and the fines, penalties, violations, becomes increasingly difficult to do so. And that's why we're looking at things like self-checkout. I'll give you another example. Very few states in the United States have this law. It's called the item pricing law. So our average store sells maybe 5 million items a year. Each and every item must have a label on it that has the price. It's an archaic system that goes back to pre-computer days. Think about the labor, the environmental consequences of having, just in our business alone, hundreds of millions of
I
labels.
mean, in a similar manner, the restaurants, I've done a number of shows with restaurant owners. The problem when the inspectors come in, they come in at any time of the day and they can close your operation down when they're doing the search. And then if you get a grade pending or anything like a B or C, nobody's going to walk in because they think something's bad over there.
Definitely some of these regulations and implementations. So it's really just become a revenue generator for the city as a, sort of a hidden tax.
What about hours? I mean, as landlords, what hours do you require today and what hours are the typical store open, especially based on what I said before on the Generation X and the younger generation, who come to stores at different hours of the day?
I think it's hard for landlords to mandate operating procedures to a retailer. I mean, the way I wake up every day is I defer to the retailer. And I might collaborate or think it through with the retailer and talk about...
Are you upset when Chick-fil-A is closed on Sunday?
No, I respect their decision to do that.
Right.
I mean, I wish it wasn't. I happen to like it, but it is. But to my point, I would sit and Avi and I would talk about what's best for their operation. And the first day he opens might be different than the 5th year he's open, and anyone will adjust that. I was at City Point, our project in Brooklyn, for the last 2 Friday nights, and I noticed a few things that I think can be improved. I think that given the success of the movie theater and the food hall and Trader Joe's and now our expanded food hall music venue called DeKalb Stage, that the retailers on the ground floor ought to rethink their hours and be open till at least 9 o'clock to capture all that activity. Now, am I going to hit them over the head to do it? Not really, but I'm going to make them or help them understand what I'm seeing, and maybe I'm right, or at least try it.
But what if you had a volume clause in your lease?
Minimum?
Oh, a volume clause, a percentage of the
Oh, a
business.
percentage rent clause?
Yeah.
Yeah, well then I'd be much more insistent on operating hours and radius
It
restrictions.
also
and
depends
otherwise.
upon the particular store use. I mean, if it's
Yeah.
a coffee
Yeah, that's a morning.
shop,
and, right.
then you want to be up at 6 o'clock because the guy's going to come in there for a sandwich of egg and grab a cup of coffee.
Right.
So he himself is motivated to get up early and open it.
And I don't want to be, I don't want to be.
You don't want to be a boss.
Right. I don't want to impose hours on something that's not realistic.
Yeah.
To Mr. Mattone's point, if there's a coffee and daytime operator, I'm not going to force him open to stay open until 9 o'clock at night. That's just punitive, and it's doing no one any good.
Sure. Well, what's interesting, Manhattan's a little different. Manhattan, most of our stores are open 24 hours a day.
Yes, yes.
However, some stores are in co-op buildings, and our landlord is the co-op. And the co-op,
And they have a lot to say, right?
they really do have a lot to say, as they should. It's their building. But we just signed a lease on the Upper East Side where we have a clause that limits the number of hours. It stipulates that we must close by either 10 or 11 p.m. So it's the opposite of being owned by
Yeah.
a company.
We're encouraging you to do more and more.
Exactly.
Right. Well, those folks live there too, right?
That's right.
a little different.
Right. Now, I noticed Short Hills Mall, the Canadian bookseller is opening up a large store.
Indigo?
Indigo. Do you see bookstores returning?
I do, in a different form, and probably fewer of them. So I think the days of a large format 2-level bookstore along the lines of Borders or Barnes & Noble, I think those days are numbered. I think a smaller format specialty bookstore, and there's several independents. Indigo's not so independent, they're a large company, but they operate differently, and they combine the books with other merchandise and food and other experiences. So books have become somewhat of a commodity due to Amazon. So there's very little pricing movement. You can't make your money around books purely.
In a similar manner, FAO Schwarz is opening up a couple of new stores now.
I don't think that retail is dead. I think people still want to go to the Borders and spend the day, get a cup of coffee, look at a book, and the one on the Upper East Side near me is packed every time I go there. It's not, people still like to get out of the house, get out of the apartment, have an experience, spend some time, and touch and feel. So it's here to stay.
It's similar in the supermarket business. Our average store has 2,000 to 3,000 customers a day, and it spans across all social circles. You could be a doorman, someone who owns an apartment, children. You all congregate at the food store. So it really creates a hub in the community. And I believe that our opening stores in these neighborhoods that are having issues with retail, I think it helps the neighborhood overall, and I believe it actually helps retail in the neighborhoods.
In a similar manner, we're talking about food halls. You have food in your stores. How much sales are generated because you don't really have seating that they have in the food hall?
Well, many of our stores now do have seating, and depending on the location of the store, we'd have a greater percentage in prepared foods. We have one store, for example, that's close to 50%. That's the wave of the future. It used to be prepared foods were, for people in the neighborhood who work in offices getting lunch. Now people may come home from work and decide to eat in instead of eating out, and they'll actually go to our service case, buy food, and bring it in, and instead of cooking. So it's a transition.
So as I open with Mr. Conlon's remarks about Mark Twain, retail is not dead. It's just changing. It's a total evolution, okay? Neighborhoods have changed, other things have taken place, and retail will change. And if we spoke about this in a year from now, it will continue to change. And I'd like to thank Mr. Mattone, Chris, Brad, and Avi, and I'll see you next week.